So we're about to launch a big campaign in schools all across the United States to talk specifically with young people, but also their teachers and their counselors about the youth mental health crisis. So the first question I have in that regard is, what would be the basic message we should be sharing with young people today about this?
Well, when it comes to mental health, a couple of key things for young people to know. Number one is that if you are struggling with your mental health, you are not alone. Many people do struggle with their mental health. It is part of the human experience. And so that's critical, because I think feeling alone can make you feel a whole lot worse. Mm-hmm. The second thing to know is that there is help available. We now have more and more schools that have school counselors. Mm-hmm. This is something that we worked very hard in the beginning of the Biden administration to fund, because we knew that not enough schools had the counseling services available. But we also want people to know that there is a crisis line now, 988, which is available. So if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can dial 988, you can text 988, and you can get access to a trained counselor who can provide you with support in the moment and help you figure out local resources that you can connect to. This is an important development as well. But I think the third thing that's really important for young people to know is that we need to all be there to support one another mm-hmm. when it comes to our mental health and well-being. And you don't need a medical degree or a nursing degree in order to be able to help somebody else who's struggling. You just need to be somebody who's willing to reach out and ask them how they're doing, who's willing to listen to how they are, and who's willing to be there with them as a source of support. It's not about having all the answers. It's not about fixing people's problems. But simply when you show up and ask somebody how they're doing, what you're telling them is, I see you, mm-hmm. you matter, and I'm there for you, even when you're struggling. And so that's something each and all of us can do. And I think it's what we're called to do right now at a time where really record numbers of people are struggling with their mental health.
So it's very important then to tell young people that it's okay not to be okay, and to be honest about how you're mm-hmm. feeling, and that you're not alone. What do you think the messages are that we should be giving to teachers and educators across the country about youth mental health? How can they be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked, because teachers play such a vital role, obviously, in the development of kids, mm-hmm. including with their mental health. But I do worry that we ask teachers to do so much mm-hmm. Beyond what they're often supported to do, sometimes trained to do, and certainly have the time to do. But we know that when teachers, for example, are overburdened, when they struggle, that will have an impact on children naturally, you know, because it's just how it is. In a similar way to when a parent is stressed and overburdened at home, that can have an impact on their children, because children pick up on this. But I do think what we have to provide teachers with is, number one, training in mental health, so they understand what are the signs that you should look for to know if your child is struggling, to know what resources are available to help direct a child so they can get the help and support they need, and also to understand how they can talk about mental health in a way that can be destigmatizing, that can help bring people in and help young people recognize that, hey, you know, this is not something that's wrong with me necessarily, or a fundamental flaw that I have if I'm struggling. One last thing we've got to do for teachers, I think, is to make more resources in terms of mental health supports available around them. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one thing to have a mental health provider in your community. It's another thing to have that provider and that help right there in the school, right? And we know that in some ways I think about mental health like the gym. The closer it is to you, the more likely you are to use it, right? And with mental health, you know, we now are in a position where we can use technology to bring virtual counseling services to people where they are, as opposed to expecting them to wait 2 or 3 months and drive 30 miles to see somebody in person. There's still a role for in-person care, don't get me wrong. But one of the silver linings of the pandemic is it actually pushed us to accelerate the use of telemedicine, of providing counseling services and other services virtually, and a lot of people benefited from that. And so we've got to make sure that those services are available to people. We've got to allow those services to be provided across state lines, mm-hmm. which is one of the big efforts we're pushing for right now. But these are ways in which we can better support teachers and allow them to better support young people when it comes to their mental health and well-being.
And a final question about teachers. Mm-hmm. So, again, most teachers, including myself, are not trained as mental health experts. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty much of a common sense approach to this. Is that a fair way to say it? That teachers to both recognize that they may be dealing with their own challenges, but that in a very simple, common sense way, you can speak to your class individually, but collectively also about these issues. Do you think that a teacher can speak to the group of their class about these issues?
I do think that there are powerful messages that teachers can share with their kids. There are conversations that they can open up with their children around mental health. And again, you don't have to be a mental health expert to be able to do this, but part of that power comes from the fact that teachers are incredibly important figures. They're role models for many kids. They shape the experience that our children have in schools day to day. And when they speak up about an issue like mental health, it makes a difference. The words that they use make a difference. The experiences that they choose to even share about their own childhood, about the experiences that they've seen, over the course of their life with mental health, that makes a big difference too. And it makes a difference not just to the kids, but honestly it makes a difference to parents too. And this is a place where I do think that schools being able to bring parents into this conversation around mental health is so important, because after school, kids go home. And many times, kids have parents who love them dearly and care about them and want the best for them, but didn't necessarily grow up knowing how to talk about mental health.
Right.
They may have their own struggles with mental health. They may feel ashamed about that. They may have all kinds of, sort of tools and support that they need to figure out how to talk about mental health. So if we really want to help kids, we have to think about the environment they're in. They're in school, they're at home, they're in the community. And the more we can make sure that the people around them, in particular their teachers and their parents, know how to talk about mental health, know how to be supportive when their kid may be struggling, know how to look for the signs that children may be having a tough time, the better off our children will ultimately be.
So there's a big homeschool connection here. This is really something that, and do you, that affects you all day long. So are there, you've talked a lot about the solutions regarding parents. Are there sort of one or two basic things that all parents should know about this?
Well, I think for parents, one of the most important things you can do is to start a conversation with your child about mental health. It doesn't mean you got to know everything to say, but even just asking your child how they're doing, even talk to them about mental health, even about your own experiences with mental health, can be profoundly important, because what does that do? It tells your child it's okay to talk about these things. It also tells your child that you're somebody they can come to if they're having a tough time. So even if your child says nothing during that conversation, there's still an important value to having that. The second thing that you can do is you can make sure that you're supporting your children in building healthy relationships in their life, making sure they have time to spend with family, making sure that they've got time with friends, also encouraging them and ensuring that they have some time in person with these people in their lives as opposed to solely time online. Because we know that relationships are protective when it comes to our mental health, and the stronger our relationships are, the more likely we are to do well in terms of our mental health. So these are a couple of simple things that parents can do. But I'll leave you with this, and I say this as a parent myself of two small children, and where I'm constantly thinking about what can I do to support them in their mental health and well-being. And sometimes, look, as a dad, sometimes I feel worried and lost as well. Like I think about the fact that my kids are going to be using technology and social media someday, and I worry. I don't always know like how best to protect my kids. But here's one thing I want to remind every parent. The love you provide your child, the unconditional love that you make sure they know they have from you, that is worth so much. Because, and I say this again, not just as an emotional statement, but the data very clearly tells us that when children have secure attachments in their life, when they have people that they can depend on, people who they know are going to be there for them, who love them unconditionally, that is one of the most powerful forces in ensuring that our kids are not only mentally well, but they have good physical health in the future, that they have better outcomes in terms of graduation rates, in terms of their likelihood of staying healthy and safe and not running into trouble in terms of violence in communities and running into trouble in the criminal justice system. All of these outcomes are better when children have strong, healthy relationships in their life. And as a parent, you are one of the most important relationships that they have. And so even, if you feel like you're lost as a parent, you're not sure all the right things to do, if you can make sure your child knows that you love them and you're there for them, it's one of the most powerful things you can do to help protect and support your child.